how do you think about specifically the number of accounts to give an SDR or an AE that's doing outbound or following up with inbound, what have you?
Capacity on inbound, especially hot inbound, should be a math equation. Demos per day. That's the metric that we use. There shouldn't be a lot of guesswork. Outbound's a little bit more challenging.
You said inbound, and then you described somebody raising their hand, filling out a form, basically saying, I want to talk to sales. Are you only thinking of those sort of hot hand raiser leads, or are you also including the scored leads, the folks filling out forms to download white papers that end up, being identified as an MQL in many organizations?
We delineate hot versus warm on inbound. The hottest lead, if you will, to your point, is a form fill. They've requested a demo. They've done the CTA, the call to action, where they get to your website. There is a call to action, speak with someone. It doesn't get any hotter than that.
You've got to spend money from your precious budget to have your salespeople following up with these MQLs, just like you do outbound. So how do you think about that problem?
So Eddie, we've only got an hour, and you just hit on probably one of the hottest topics.
Welcome to Go-to-Market Science, the podcast for CROs and revenue leaders scaling mature B2B companies. There's an art and there's a science to go-to-market, and we're obsessed with the science. In this podcast, we share tangible, actionable playbooks from the trenches, from what we're learning working as go-to-market strategy and RevOps consultants for our clients here at Union Square Consulting, and candid conversations with revenue leaders in the market that have been there. If this podcast delivers value, we'd love a 5-star rating and a follow. Now let's get into it. All right, welcome to another episode of Go-to-Market Science. I'm Eddie Reynolds, the founder and CEO of Union Square Consulting. And today we're going to talk about how ZoomInfo re-engineered their go-to-market to shift focus from inbound SMB to more outbound and upmarket. And we have our special guest today, James Roth, the CRO of ZoomInfo. Thank you for joining me today, James.
Hey, Eddie, thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to dive into this topic. We've talked offline a lot about what we wanted to cover today, and I think this is going to be a really valuable episode for folks in go-to-market that are thinking about their inbound motion, their outbound motion, how they compare the two, how they invest in either or both, and I'm just really excited to dive into it. So we wanted specifically to discuss how you shifted from about 50-50 SMB upmarket to about 73-27 upmarket SMB and rebuilt your outbound motion. Also want to talk about the financial and the operational reasons behind the decisions to shift focus. So, like I said, thanks for joining us today. Let's start by just asking you, can you describe the shift in focus, maybe very high level? What was the before and what was the after picture of the latest iteration that you can share? Not asking you to forecast the future, of course.
Yeah, so happy to dive in. Thanks again for having me. I think a lot of companies through ZERP, through stay-at-home, through COVID, it's a great time to be in B2B SaaS. And I think a lot of companies took advantage of the fact that there was a ton of free money floating around, and SMB was a great place to be. Now, there are many companies that service almost all SMBs that are amazing companies. So don't get me wrong, it's a great space to be. At least what we saw in our particular space is that, that SMB 2021, 2022, that, like I said, ZERP, there was all sorts of money floating around. It just became a more challenging place. And I think in general, whether it's customers that are in business, then go out of business, traditionally like the micro-SMB, which we constitute as 0 to 10 employees. If you think back to 2021, where anyone could go be a startup and they could raise money and they paid no interest on that money, it was a great business, and those businesses grew. And I think when the music stopped a bit, 2023, 2024, there was just less free money, interest rates went up. And so you saw just a host of those micro SMBs either closing their doors, couldn't pay their bills, couldn't go raise more money. And so it just became a more challenging place to retain customers. And so, our move up market, we knew we had great enterprise clients, great Fortune 500, great Fortune 100. And we also knew that they were completely underpenetrated in terms of what they should be using us for. And I think that's pretty common across any platform, any software company that has other products. We had this great enterprise footprint that, frankly, the go-to-market machine was not optimized for. And so things like account loads, in that great, amazing growth period that a lot of companies went through, it was like one size can fit all. Everything's going so well. We can have account managers running Fortune 500 companies that were SDRs 3 years ago, and they have 30 accounts in the strategic enterprise. And there was just a lot of things in the go-to-market itself that were not truly optimized for upmarket excellence. And so things like the account loads, things like resources, and frankly, things like the compensation and what we were driving those teams towards, where as I first joined and I saw our pipeline in the enterprise, it was primarily made up of seat ads, small ones. This BDR team needs another 3 users. This team needs... So you have these enterprise reps that frankly are just chasing small incremental upsells of existing footprints versus doing what a true enterprise rep should be doing, which is deep discovery, understanding the business challenges, understanding how do we really fundamentally shift their go-to-market using, go-to-market intelligence from ZoomInfo. And so we optimized that. We lowered the account loads. We resourced the enterprise the right way. We brought in talent, both internally and externally, that was much more suited to go chase the enterprise. So I think when we started to optimize for the upmarket business, it was primarily because of the opportunity to take these amazing Fortune 500, Fortune 100, Fortune 50 logos that frankly weren't spending nearly as much as some of the mid-market tech companies that were fully leaned into ZoomInfo. So it started as an opportunity. And then I think as that SMB market started to shift post-ZERP, it became more of a necessity than anything else. And so we made a shift, not necessarily out of the small business, because it's still a great place to be. And we delineated what is great SMB, and an SMB at 25 employees, 50 employees, 75 employees, 100 employees. Those are very real businesses that have staying power. They're great businesses. And so we essentially wanted to get off a little bit of the drug that was that micro-SMB that came in very, very quickly and frankly might not have had a business a year later. And so as we were shifting out of that business, we wanted to re-resource the upmarket. And so, I think a lot of companies have gone through this. It's not 2021 anymore. You don't just have an unlimited budget to just go add anywhere you want to add. So in a budget neutral world, we were able to take resources out of some of those areas in SMB that frankly weren't necessarily as accretive as they should have been, and move those resources into the upmarket where retention is unequivocally better. You have LTV to CAC, which is unequivocally better. And so it is a stronger business for us that was under-optimized. And so that's where it really started. I think you mentioned inbound to outbound. I think a lot of companies have gone through this where AI search, if anyone has a strong inbound machine, I imagine that they've seen some degradation to what their all-time highs were from inbound, not through any fault of their own, just because you used to go to Google or a search engine and you had SEO and you had marketing teams that knew exactly what they were doing to optimize for that. And then you shift effectively overnight to an LLM search where you're plugging it into ChatGPT or you're getting the Gemini summary, and you just don't have that, here's this tab, here's the number one search provider, here's this, here's that. Those companies have yet to monetize that. And so there's not really a playbook on how to optimize for LLM search. And frankly, each LLM is different. Some optimize for Reddit, some YouTube. It really depends. And so I think many companies that we have seen started flying a bit blind as they saw some of the inbound traffic going down a bit. And so it brought back the need to have fantastic outbound, frankly, also through necessity. Just because until these companies start to monetize AI search, if you will, so you can start to, do the things that you did on SEO traditionally, folks had to go the old-fashioned way and go outbound. And I think the wonderful part of outbound is that when I first started in my sales journey as an outbound rep, I was going door to door. It was the least intelligent outbound you could imagine. Here's your territory, go door to door, find people who might be interested. This, not to date myself, but it was a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And now I think the current landscape gives you the opportunity to have a far more intelligent outbound motion based on signals, actions, recommended actions, AI talk tracks. It basically gives the opportunity for outbound, which typically, if you looked at the metrics of inbound versus outbound obviously more efficient, because they're hand raisers, they fill out a form, they are interested. Where outbound, you can use those signals, you can use the technology that says, well, this thing is not a hand raiser that filled out a form. we do know that they just hired a new CRO. They just got taken private. They just raised funding. They just said on an earnings call. You can come in with a far more educated, eloquent point of view to go drum up that outbound motion. So I think both of them were by necessity. Both of the moves, at least, that we've seen a lot of customers making by necessity, whether it's SMB starts to get a little bit worse, inbound gets a little bit worse. So where can we optimize within the go-to-market machine to basically fill the gap, whether it was a gap that we decided to fill, a la shifting away from some of the SMB, or a gap that surfaced because of a change in the landscape like AIO or LLM search.
That's great. That's a great summary. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's see, where do I start? I'll start by clarifying inbound. So you said inbound, and then you described somebody raising their hand, filling out a form, basically saying, I want to talk to sales. Help me understand, when you're talking about this and the context in which you're talking about it, are you only thinking of those sort of hot hand raiser leads, or are you also including the scored leads, the folks filling out forms to download white papers, et cetera, that end up, being identified as an MQL in many organizations?
Yeah, so we delineate hot versus warm on inbound. And so, the hottest lead, if you will, to your point, is a form fill. They've requested a demo. They've done the CTA, the call to action, where they get to your website. There is a call to action, speak with someone. It doesn't get any hotter than that. Mm-hmm. That trickles down into warm, which is, attended a webinar, like they have shown interest. There is a scored model where they have expressed interest through a variety of different channels, and then we rank them accordingly. But it is all companies coming to us, a la inbound, in one way, shape, or form. Whether they're saying, Eddie, I love what I'm seeing. I would love a demo. Please send a good AE my way. Hot. To the joined a webinar, responded, click through an email, some level of inbound interest that then we would go follow up on. And so that's a whole side of the motion of the pipeline over here. And then outbound are things like, the AE self-sourcing, calling a company in their territory that has expressed no interest. You've got things like go-to-market plays. There's a variety of outbound, but I think the cleanest delineation, outbound is a company that frankly is not necessarily actively engaging with you proactively. And so that's where the signal to action, where there's a trail of breadcrumbs that might mean that this is a company that is in market. They have not expressed inbound interest yet, but we know they are in market for our services. And so we need to outbound, reach out to them and drum up that particular interest.
And I think most people would share that definition. The reason that I asked you to clarify it is I want to unpack this, because one of the challenges that I always see is, let's take like the most low intent MQL that you have. Somebody, downloads a white paper, you've gotten their email. Maybe this is an organization that hasn't yet really optimized their inbound marketing funnel, and they're passing this MQL over to the salespeople, and the salespeople are saying these leads are not like any good. Like, we call these people, they don't call us back. And the way I look at this is essentially an outbound motion. We're going to call them 5, 10, 15 times. We're going to email them. We're going to call them. We're going to try to connect with them on LinkedIn. We're going to send smoke signals. And then over here, we've got this outbound prospect that doesn't know us from Adam, but oh my God, they're in the hottest account ever. Maybe we've got some signals that they are, in a buying state. We've got the person in the right buying persona that we can reach out to, versus like this intern in this like tier 7 company over here that has like almost no chance of buying from us. How did you think about that in your business, in terms of like, at the end of the day, you have to spend money to have salespeople pick up the phone or send emails to follow up with either of these, non-hand raiser inbound leads. I mean, you still have to follow up with a lot of the folks that raise their hand. They don't always respond to that first email either, but theoretically they're a lot easier. But you've got to spend money from your precious budget to have your salespeople following up with these MQLs, just like you do outbound. So how do you think about that problem?
So Eddie, we've only got an hour, and you just hit on probably one of the hottest topics between any, sales org and marketing org. It's really case by case. And there's been enough published on, the death of the MQL and MQLs, like what are they really? You've got this concept of hot versus warm. I joke internally, like it should just be good versus bad, but So yes, I think there has been a tremendous amount of effort over the years to juice the MQL number, if you will, by very low levels of real intent so that certain teams can hit their number, a la we hit our MQL number, and that friction then exacerbates between sales and marketing. So personally,
and just to clarify, I don't mean to beat the MQL is dead thing to death. I think we've been beating that to death for many years. I'm just asking, how do you think about allocating your capital and resources towards inbound versus outbound leads?
Listen, I think the best thing to do is deconstruct the antiquated construct that those things should ever be against each other. I think the best thing you can do is have the marketing org be tied to revenue. Because, you have orgs that will put SDRs and BDRs under the CMO, or you'll have, irrespective of where those particular groups sit, there's always going to be a battleground, and if you talk to a company where the SDRs are under the CMO, sure, you take the friction out of these leads are bad, the SDRs, the conversion rate is bad. That's the fight. If the CRO has the SDRs and the CMO has the MQLs, the fight's going to be at the SDR level to say these things are trash, these MQLs aren't good, they're not really inbound, so on and so forth. If you move the SDRs over, you're going to have that same battleground just at the AE level. Sure, now the SDRs are on the take, if you will, and they're under marketing. So now you're just going to have worse conversion at the demo level with the AE, where now it's the AE who's complaining, saying that the demos are trash. This person isn't interested. Yeah, they took a meeting for a gift card, but it's not there's always going to be that friction. And so I think deconstructing the, MQLs versus conversion versus good fit show rate versus D1s versus D2s, D1s and D2s, just demo 1, demo 2. Demo 1 is, Eddie's talking to me for the first time. A demo 2 is we're having a second meeting or other people in the buying committee. Not to get too far into how the sausage is made, but each of those things, it should all be tied to a revenue number. I don't think any in the history of public earnings calls has somebody come out and said, well, look at our MQLs, right? It's all about revenue. Is it growing? Is it shrinking, et cetera? And so tying the machine to that same outcome versus having the ability for two separate groups to win in their respective game, but then lose the overall game, I think was the first thing that folks have to do. And so you asked how I think about it, whether it is a low, warm, from a bad channel, ranked low, but it's counted as warm inbound, it becomes irrelevant. And so shifting that to a go-to-market plays division or shifting that to just a more robust outbound machine, at the end of the day, they are all potential customers with a varying degree of interest. And you have to have the right motions at each level of interest and just call it for what it is. If it's very low interest, then you're probably just going to have to do more work. And so put that at the bottom of the list of priority. And so I think one of the things from a go-to-market orchestration, go-to-market optimization is that the ranking that a lot of companies have done is correct. You should absolutely score and rank the levels of interest. And so whether it's a funding round, whether it's a C-suite change, those should rank high atop the list because they are proven, they are true, they are data points. And if you are someone who sells to the CIO and they bring on a new CIO, that should be towards the top of the list. If you sell to down market focused companies and they say on a public earnings call that we need to go revitalize our down market, unequivocally, that is a good opportunity for you. Whether they've reached out to you or not, a la inbound versus outbound, you have to stack rank the signals that matter to you most. And I think one of the things that we see often is that that's not a one-size-fits-all model, right? If you do sell to CIOs or if you sell to CROs or if you sell to RevOps, you should have those signals that matter most. And it should not be an anecdotal feeling from the sales team. You should be able to look back at opportunity generation. What was happening from a signal standpoint, rear view intent standpoint? What was happening when these opportunities were generated? You should be able to see, okay, they raised money. When they raised money, they opened opportunities with us. You should be able to go back in a forensic sense and look at these are the signals that matter to us most. Maybe the loudest sales guy in the room says new C-suite is the most important thing out there. But then the data shows you that, frankly, new C-suite starts, they don't open any opportunities or closed one data. You should be able to look back at all of those things and say, these are the 3 to 5 signals or breadcrumbs that matter most, and then orchestrate that from a prioritization level and say, these things just happened. And if you have a list of 100 calls to make on an outbound or plays motion, these things happened. I'm going after these 25 first, and I'm going to put more effort into these 25. When I run out of those 25 things to do, and I've set up my sequences, and I've made my calls, and I've sent my emails, and I've done my groundswell, so on and so forth, now I'm going to move down to the ones that might be a little bit colder. And so, like I said, irrespective of the segment, the vertical, the product that you're selling, the first thing folks have to do to optimize outbound, whether that includes warm inbound or however they constitute warm inbound, it is all just getting that opportunity open with a buyer that is either in market, is soon to be in market, and scoring those accordingly to make sure, like, at no point should an SDR ever walk into a day and say, what should I do? They should have a cultivated list, whether that's from marketing, whether that's from RevOps, whether that's from marketing ops. It lives in a lot of different places across a lot of different companies. But regardless, you cannot put a 23-year-old first-time in sales SDR and give them autonomy to say, what should I do today? It has to be a list. It has to be prioritized. There has to be a point of view on each of those as to why this is prioritized at a higher level. Because these 3 signals happened, because they did this, and here's an AI talk track for the vertical, for the sub-vertical, for the segment, for what the last 10 deals that we closed said, did, the value propositions that won. They should know exactly who to call, exactly what to say. And this concept of AI SDRs, AI should be a huge augment to the SDRs that take the things away that typically make an SDR's day hard. Who do I call? Why am I calling them? What am I saying? If you can eliminate those 3 things with the right list of people to call into, the right messaging to say, and the right signals, and so the SDR sits down at 8 o'clock or 7:30 or 9 o'clock, whatever time they come in, and it's, this is what I'm doing today. This is who I'm reaching out to. This is why, and this is what I'm saying. That is where outbound or low quality inbound, warm, whatever it may be, it all gets thrown out the window to say, we are going to open opportunities with people today, if that makes any sense.
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I want to ask you a small favor. Take 30 seconds right now, open up the app you're listening to this on, and give us a 5-star rating. It sounds small, but it's the single biggest thing you can do to help us get conversations like this in front of more revenue leaders. While you're there, hit follow so you never miss an episode. Okay, let's get back into it. It aligns so much. I mean, I could spend the rest of this podcast just talking about that thing. But you know, I think the one thing I'll say is, I mean, you're touching on literally what inspired me to start my company, Union Square Consulting. I experienced what you're describing in every sales role I've ever had. I've been in sales for, I think, like 25 years now. And then suddenly I walk in the door at Salesforce as an AE, and they just served all of this up to me on a silver platter. And previous to that, I was figuring all of this stuff out myself. I was uploading lists to Salesforce. I was doing all the research. And it's an incredible amount of work that should not be done by quota carrying salespeople, at least not the first pass. Maybe the final 5 yards where you're going to websites and you're doing some custom research. There's a lot of use cases for AI there. But to give an AE or SDR to just say, here, start from scratch, here's 5,000 accounts, figure out who to call, or here's a license to ZoomInfo, start, grabbing people that you think you want to call. I can't think of anything more inefficient than that. When you have other people that are better at that activity, that are not responsible for carrying quota, that could and have constitutional knowledge or institutional knowledge and context that could do that for them. And that's actually what I wanted to unpack here. And so like my next question here is, how do you think about capacity? When you think about building out this outbound motion, I have my viewpoints on how we think capacity should be thought about and done, but how do you think about specifically the number of accounts to give an SDR or an AE that's doing in outbound or following up with inbound, what have you?
Yeah, so I think capacity on inbound, especially hot inbound, should be a math equation, demos per day. That's the metric that we use, demos per day. Once you start to redline around 3, 4, 5, you need to add capacity. If demos per day drops to 1 to 2, you probably don't need as much capacity. There shouldn't be a lot of guesswork on that front. Outbound's a little bit more challenging. I think it's really dependent on segment, what your TAM is. If you look at Zscaler that just sells to the enterprise, they've got 7,000 accounts. Their capacity is going to look very different. If you're a land and expand motion, if you have, you've landed 10 users at Microsoft, and then you need to go expand into all of the different BUs, each of those should determine the capacity that you have or the product that you're selling. Is it a platform? Is it consumption driven? I think people have to start with what is that end goal, if you will. If I just land my platform and then I have to get you to consume more, it's a very different outbound motion, especially on the existing customer side, than it is I just landed North America, but now I need to go land international and basically reopen that opportunity. So I don't think there is, unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all answer for that. I think it's very dependent on what segments do you sell to, what verticals do you sell to, is it a land and expand motion, is it a consumption motion, is it a seat-based model, and then aligning the resources or the capacity to drive that. So like for us specifically, we in our old days were very much a fast land and then large expand model. And so if you think of inbound comes in, hand raiser, form fill, demo set for the AE, BDR manager at a Fortune 500 company wants 5 ZoomInfo licenses. That new business rep closes those 5 licenses, and then it moves over to an enterprise account manager. The enterprise account manager's responsibility is to go from 10 BDR seats to a multi-million-dollar ELA, enterprise license agreement. So the resourcing should be very much set to that. So in that construct, the enterprise account manager, even though it's existing business, should probably have more outbound SDR capacity working in a pod model saying, okay, Eddie, you're going to go after North America. Here are the 5 people that matter. Here are the decision makers in North America. Tom's going to go after international. Here's the hierarchy. Here's the org chart. Go. On the flip side, as you start to move into more enterprise land on new business, you shift resources over there because you're trying to now land more larger ASP, larger footprints, if you will. And so it's just a different model. So the way at least that I think about capacity is what are we really trying to drive in this account? And we are predominantly a seat-based model. And for the most part, the traditional ZoomInfo of old was a prospecting tool. And so we wanted to get it into the hands of as many prospectors as we could. As we've evolved, and now we have account managers, we have account executives, a lot of the AI use cases that you're talking about, first and third party data together. It's now not just the BDRs and SDRs and self-sourcing account executives. It's the full go-to-market team as far as what they are using ZoomInfo for. And so that has fundamentally changed our capacity models as well, because from an efficiency standpoint, from an LTV to CAC standpoint, if we have, 80% of the Fortune 500, but 20% of them are sub 100K spenders, that is our opportunity. And so I'm going to put capacity there to go drum up more interest in a groundswell, more interest in the additional business units than I am to try to go land small ASP deals at the next one, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm curious if this aligns with the way that I'm thinking about capacity planning, because I feel like you're describing top down, and I tend to think of this as bottoms up, which I think could be really complementary to each other. I think about, well, okay, so let's say you have an SDR and theoretically they have 7 or 8 hours in a day to make calls or do prospecting. What is the step-by-step process for them to do that? Are we calling on extremely small businesses where we can make 500 calls a day or what have you? Or are we calling, a Fortune 500 company where we need to read through their, financial statements and do all this research? And, it might take hours before we send our first email, which we could then follow up with other emails that might be faster. But how many activities can I do in a day? And the way that I think about this is if I do the math and I say, okay, well, we can do this many activities in this period of time. In your example, this is exactly what I saw at Salesforce. Now you're not just selling to the BDR manager. You've got the AE manager. You've got the, CSM managers, et cetera. You're going all the way across the organization. So now you've got 5, 10, 15 different people you could be selling to. Even in a relatively small company, Fortune 500, you could have 1,000 people you could potentially sell to, or 100. So when you start to do that math, you land on, okay, if this person does all the right things with all the best accounts that we can identify, at like a a mid-market level, they can handle 50 accounts. And at an enterprise, like when I was at Salesforce, we had a lot of enterprise reps that had one account. That was it. And they didn't even have that account for themselves. They shared it with a bunch of other people because they would go global and the other person would go, US, another person Europe, and then like a more junior person going for like all the small divisions of the enterprise. And I was just blown away at how they carved that up. Is that the way that you think about it, or do you think about it a different way?
Yeah. So first and foremost, Salesforce is one of those companies that modeling the enterprise after, where you've got ECS, the enterprise corporate seller that is chasing those transactional upsells. And you have a renewals team that's just focused on the renewal. And then you've got AEs across all the different product sets. That's probably, the gold standard for big platform enterprise. ServiceNow, similar. As you talk about bottoms up, tops down, and sort of what they're trying to go after, I think it's important to delineate between the old way and the new way, because a lot of what you talked about as far as time and capacity and what you expect from an enterprise SDR, yes, 18 months ago, they had to be combing through 10Ks. They had to understand at least what they're saying on public earnings calls. Like the constant friction from the enterprise AE or AM was these SDRs just don't get it. They're calling into these, like I'd rather call into them because they don't really know what they're saying. I think one of the big benefits of AI is that now the leveling up, if you will, from a talk track, from an industry perspective, from the ability to point, click, and shoot, and you've got their last 3 quarterly earnings calls summarized for you with a point of view, that didn't exist 18 months ago. And so now I think from a capacity standpoint, like, yes, one of the things that we look at here, just from an overall account load standpoint, I think one of Salesforce's biggest accounts, there's like 5 different AEs that support it. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name, but it's a huge customer and they've got, to your point, all kinds of additional AMs in it. That was our goal, is to get to the 1, maybe 2 accounts. I think post AI and post what we're able to do, one of the things we do internally for capacity planning is, we have the opportunity now. Everything is, if you think about everything you use in a given day, like our tech stack, you've got, Google Cloud, Google Drive, you've got Docs, you've got Sheets, you've got Prezos, you've got all the chorus calls. Like, I know exactly what people are doing at any given point in the day. And now you can summarize all of that information very quickly to say, okay, Eddie is a top account manager. What's he doing? And we've done this exercise. And so we picked a handful of our top folks, and it shows that, okay, in the month of May, Eddie was on 45 hours of customer calls. Eddie prepared for those customer calls across these particular things. He spent 80 hours building decks. He spent 40 hours doing this. And so what we shifted from is get account loads down to 1 to 2 come hell or high water. Now, when you look at what is in their day, and if you say 80 hours of prep time going across all of these different things, and then another 80 hours of putting the prezos together in XYZ 1, 2, 3, if we can shorten that to 5 to 10 hours with all of these powerful AI tools that summarize these things, that find the information, etc., I actually don't need to lower account loads to 1, because they can be as productive, like what we wanted to do. And I think what a lot of companies, we're kind of all over the place here, so I apologize, but what a lot of companies look for from like an ROI perspective on AI is like, you've got the time savings use case, you've got, incremental revenue, you've got incremental customers, incremental pipeline, and everybody's kind of searching for that. How is AI really moving the needle? And for us, what we wanted to do, we set out on a mission to say, here are the top account managers, here are the top AEs, this is how they spend their time. It's not just giving that individual the 80 hours back of making decks, easy AI use case, or doing research, easy AI use case. It is, we want to see those numbers go down, and we want to see hours in meeting go up. And so if you've got 45 hours in a month on talk time, like that's what makes us money, is I, James, account manager, managing Eddie's account. I want to increase that to 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours, and then decrease all of the other non-customer facing time through automation, through AI, et cetera. And so as we did that, we had this moment where the capacity model that we were going after was, okay, this guy can only have 1 account because look at all the time this account is taking him, into how many more accounts can they have in a more efficient manner now that they're getting all this time back. And the same thing goes for the SDR. If the SDR is the one hunting and pecking around 35 different tabs, and they're going to LinkedIn, they're going to ZoomInfo, and then they're going to their lead list that marketing sent them, tremendous waste of time. And so in this, we need more SDRs because it is so hard for them to put together a thoughtful point of view. And then you've got all these different BUs, and they're chasing after this warm lead, if you will, that marketing sent them. Then yeah, you need a lot of SDRs. And I think when you start to pair the AI augmentation into focusing on the best accounts, a la the lead scoring, the in-market scoring, the fit score, if you will, and we can give them, this is what you should say based on their earnings call, based on the industry point of view, based on the vertical point of view, et cetera, you actually have a lot more time in the day than you did before. And so you can start to look at how much capacity do we need. So I know it's a very long answer to your question, but I think each organization should be looking at that. And it's, some folks will push back and say, hey, it's Big Brother if we look at exactly what James does in a given day. I don't think it's Big Brother. It's only Big Brother if you're using it only as the stick to say, Eddie, you're just not working hard enough. I think if you look at your best people where that fear is outside, you're not worried that Eddie's not working that hard. You want to see exactly how to optimize Eddie's time so that Eddie can be the most successful Eddie that he can be.
I mean, it completely aligns. It's funny you mentioned that because when I joined Salesforce, I was really worried that it was going to be Big Brother. And what I found is, wow, they just took all this stuff off my plate that are non-sales activities, and now I can be laser focused. And it was like a really detailed answer, but I realized I skipped this in the intro, but this segment we're on is called CRO Stories. So I wanted to hear your story about how you did this, and that's what you're doing. So it's great. To fast forward here, I wanted to get into territories, targeting, and segments. And because we're limited on time, I want to kind of drill this down. Where I was going with my question was, the thing that I thought was amazing at Salesforce, and like I came from the first AE in a SaaS startup, ironically built on Salesforce. So like polar opposite experiences, right? So I went from my territory being everyone on earth in this industry or a couple industries to just because that's the only thing we sold to, or these two industries, to I'm at Salesforce and I've got 60 accounts in one zip code in Manhattan, which is basically like 2 or 3 city blocks that I also shared with like 16 other reps that covered different industries or different size companies. And, you're like, how am I going to spend a year calling 60 accounts? And sure enough, like the math worked out and I made 20 calls a day and there's always somebody to call for something. And it all worked out. I'm curious how you think about, because like the hill I'm trying to die on is, okay, we use all this AI and we increase all of this output. And now our salespeople have more capacity and they can spend more time on the phone with customers or prospects. And I'm all for that. That's amazing. You still end up at a number of, here are the accounts that they're going to work and here are the accounts that they're not going to work. So I'm curious how you, thought through that in this move to outbound, and then B, also to give you an opportunity to just plug your product. Like how do your reps use ZoomInfo to do that?
Yeah. So it's a great question. There's a lot in there. So, I think at the highest level, because very similar to you, I started with a zip code and there had been 17 other reps in that zip code a month before me, high churn and burn, go knock on doors, make calls, whatever. And I think now the opportunity, and this gets into some of the nuance, whether you have a verticalized team where you have a team that goes after financial services, and within that you have fintech and you have commercial banking, you have, we could spend an hour just on vertical territories. I think depending on where your team is, I always like to boil it down to first principles in terms of what segment are you going after? Do you want to verticalize that segment or not? Let's say mid-market. We call mid-market 100 to 1,000 employees. You have that total addressable market. That should be the very bottom of the pyramid. And then companies call it a variety of different things. TAM, SAM, SOM, PAM, blah, blah, blah. Just to make it easy, you have your total addressable market. Here are all of the 100 to 1,000 employee companies in North America, right? Now, if you're a team of 10, maybe you have one rep that has that entire thing. And so it's kind of chicken and egg in terms of, yes, it's easy to say at Salesforce, which is a $40 billion revenue company, and they've got it refined down to a science where even in HLS, healthcare and life sciences, there's teams, there's co-primes, there's overlays. It's a
well, and just to clarify, it might be helpful to clarify. I don't think the episode of this podcast is meant to try to help Salesforce improve their business, right? So I'm really thinking about the company that's selling into SMB, mid-market, or enterprise, and maybe they have a sales team of 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. They're not Salesforce. And that's the challenge that I saw is, okay, I've got 50 sales reps. You have Ohio. Well, there's a lot of people to call in Ohio. Who should I call?
Well, so that's what I was getting at. When you take some of that nuance out, very basic. Whether you sell to industrial firms and you're in Ohio, you will have a total addressable market. You should be able to see here are all the industrial firms in the Midwest. So that's your total addressable market. And then you go into the next layer, which whatever you call it from an acronym standpoint is more of an in-market score. And so of these industrial firms, there's 100 of those industrial firms. Of those 100, there should be 25 of them that are exuding some kind of in-market score. And this, you can also throw marketing out the window because you don't need marketing for this particular use case. There are plenty of tools out there. We are one of them that you can say, these are of the 100. Like I can do this as a sales rep. Here are all the companies. Here are the companies that are in market based on these particular things. We talked about the signals. We talked about the changes or what they're saying on earnings calls, whatever it may be. Here are the 25 that are in market. And so if I'm a sales rep and I own that particular vertical, that particular market, that particular territory, that's what you should be doing. And if you get to a point where you're seeing conversion rates, you're seeing win rates, you're seeing that rep hit capacity, now it's time to put a second rep into Ohio industrial firms. If that rep is not getting to that and there's just, there's not enough because there's only 25 that are in market, then you keep one and maybe you expand them to industrial firms that are in Ohio and Indiana. And so I think it's irrespective of size of company or who you're selling to, it breaks down to the very basic, what is my addressable market? I have a product I sell to bus drivers. There are 15,000 buses working in North America at any given time. That is my addressable market. Now I need to look at, of those 15,000 buses, 5,000 of them are from Greyhound. So I'm going to put a really good enterprise rep on Greyhound because that's 5,000 of the 15,000 buses. I don't know if that's true, but that's at least the way, if you're a 5-person company, if you're a 1,000-person company, that you should be looking at territories and segments and verticals. It is what is the product market fit? Data should tell me that because I should have customers. I think the only thing this doesn't apply to is if you just created a company and you don't know any of this information, you have to go out there and find it, whether that's founder-led sales, whatever it may be. But if you have customers, you should be able to say, like, my product market fit, my product serves mid-market tech companies. That's my sweet spot. And then I look at a geographic lens and I see, okay, how many mid-market tech firms are in Silicon Valley? How many are in New York? How many are in Boston? Now I have a pretty good sense of where I want to focus my people. And then you look at the in-market score in terms of how many reps do I really need in this space? And then you let that bake for a minute to see what are the conversion rates, what are the win rates, optimize the machine a bit and say, okay, this person in New York that's got financial services, there's a lot of in-market and we're winning a lot of deals there. Let's go put another rep. Let's add capacity there. On the flip side, if it's not, and there's always the question of, is it because the rep isn't very good? I think now from like a coaching and seeing what works and what doesn't work, it's a little bit easier to do that. But at a high level, that's at least how I think about capacity in territories that are not necessarily tied to size of company or how many salespeople you have.
Love it. I'm completely aligned with that as well. And it's a nice segue because the next thing I want to ask you about is reporting and driving adoption. So you've got this team, you're getting them to do more outbound, or let's say you're in a company where you've never done outbound before and you're building out your outbound motion. But the story is really about how you guys did it, to the extent that as a public company, you can share this. How did you think about the reporting you wanted to look at specifically for outbound, specifically for, are we doing the right things? Is it working? What kind of reports were you looking at, and how were you using those reports to drive adoption and help the team to execute and also to improve their execution?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think a lot of firms just look at baseline activity as the metric. And I think that's incredibly out of date, because you'd be surprised. And, we've got 40,000 customers. You see how these folks are running their go-to-markets. And many of them still just have, hey, it's 100 calls a week. Hey, it's 1,000 calls a week. Like, that's it. That's the metric they look at. And so I think if you just look at overall top of pipeline, we talked about some of these, but you've got conversion rates, you've got good fit show rate, you've got demo ones, you've got demo twos. What are you trying to drive, if you will? And so for us specifically, upmarket, demo twos are actually more valuable than demo ones. And so if you have the first demo and it's with Eddie, and then you want to go expand the buying committee, everybody talks about this ad nauseum, but hey, buying committees are getting bigger, sales cycles are getting longer. Those D2s, like if I look at enterprise, usually my eyes will go to D2s first. You have the baseline conversion rate of like, okay, this lead converted at this, whatever it may be. If you look at outbound, it's still, yes, it's still activity. Activity, sadly, to all the salespeople listening, activity never goes away, but I think it's refining the activity. And that's where I get back to that magic list, if you will, that says these top 25, I want you to spend more time on because they are exuding more signals. And one of the things that we have within our product is we now will show that, okay, Eddie, I served your team, say you're a sales manager, I served you 1,000 signals over the North American region in the past month. Your team actioned 500. And so there's 500 signals that we serve to you, whether you say they're good signals or bad signals, they went unactioned. And so I think from an outbound standpoint, it is what is the volume of activity you are doing, but in an incredibly refined way of we want you to do these activities first. These should be your biggest, these should be your focus. And then more importantly, we're going to give you what to say to each of them. And you can track this, whether it's email sequences, whether it's listening to the calls. Now AI can summarize all those calls to say, we gave you a talk track predicated on the industry vertical, on the whatever it may be, on the signal that they showed. Did you do it or not? So it's still activity at the baseline, but it's a much more refined, much more intelligent activity. And then making sure those folks are driving those activities. And then, like I said at the beginning, it is the talk track that we're giving, is the point of view, is the vertical, is the signal right? And I think the ability to then optimize that to say, well, we gave you all of these things based on what we thought was the best signal and the best talk track. Conversion rates are not good. Good fit show rate is not good. So we've now got to dial it back and maybe relook at the signals that we're sending, relook at the market that we're going after, so on and so forth. But in a summary, it is the activity, the outcomes of those activities, conversion, good fit show rate, demo ones, demo twos, closed one, etc. I think all of those remain the same. It is just the detail or the nuance within each of those that go a layer to maybe 2 layers deeper that folks will miss out on.
Yeah, again, it completely aligns for me. I had another CRO I was talking to that said he reads from right to left. And I thought it was an interesting way to think about this, where if you have a rep and they're crushing quota, then okay, I might still have questions about your sales activity, your pipeline, et cetera. But like, this is working, right? I mean, can we make it better? Like, great, let's dive in, but great. If you're not hitting quota, well, then are you generating enough pipeline? So then is that real pipeline? Why is that not converting? If you're not generating enough pipeline, are you getting enough meetings? If you're not getting enough meetings, what's happening there? And I really like that rubric to think about. The other thing that I tend to think about, and I'm curious how this compares for you, is where are those activities going? Are they going into the right accounts? And this is something I've always struggled with. If I have a rep and they're making their 100 calls a day or 20 calls a day or whatever it is, how do I think about, are those calls going in the right place? Like, are we covering the best accounts enough times, or are they just calling everybody and they're not converting anybody because they're casting their net too wide?
Yep. So I think that's back to the D1, D2. So by the way, I love the right to left thing. I think the one thing I would add to right to left is, as you start to look at the folks that are crushing their quota, the ability to reverse engineer what they are doing is incredibly important. How are you getting to that crushing of the quota? And then can I automate those activities? Can I automate those actions? Can I automate, okay, it's this particular segment, whatever it may be. Reading from right to left is the right way to do it, but then making sure that you look across that, the columns, if you will, from right to left to say, okay, what are they doing? And this is beauty of the last 5 years, is now I can just drill into exactly what they're doing, whether it's see the email, see the call, see their messaging, see what they're doing. Like, what is their secret sauce? And then how do I apply that to the folks at the bottom of the chart? The second point is a great one. And it gets back to what is the right activity per segment. So if you sell to a down market and, it's an owner, or a business owner of a 10 to 15 person company, then you're probably just calling that individual. And so you might have a far different activity metric, if you will, of how many of these business owners are you calling. That's like the most traditional SMB use case. As you start to move up market, it's very different. And that's where we started to delineate the D2s, where if I look at any of our 7-figure transactions in 2025, it required hundreds of different stakeholders. And whether that was building a groundswell underneath the RevOps leader, whether that was building a groundswell of sales managers to then ultimately get to a CRO, it's far different. The key, though, is it's the same amount of activity. It's just different activity. And so I think getting really clear on, one of the things Bill McDermott did when he got to ServiceNow, they were selling to IT, then he moved to selling to the CEO. CEO, then you go, top down, bottoms up. Twilio is one of the great bottoms up companies of all time, PLG Motion, they bring their enterprise folks over that. I think depending on however that goes, you have to understand, like I said, I can look back at every meaningful transaction we did and look at the entire journey of how we got there and say, the thing that is standard across these 20 very large deals is this exact thing happened. I'm doing an SKO next week, and we've got our big deal rep. They're coming on stage. They're doing their whole deal process. And the funny thing is it looks exactly like the rep that was on stage last year, because the number of people in the buying committee, the number of calls that had to go in, the groundswell, you start with zero information. You build information from an earnings call. You understand that, hey, they just got taken private. Hey, they just paid X amount of dollars. They brought in a new CEO. You start with nothing, right? It's a pretty good fit. There's a lot of change in the company. So now's a good time to reach out. But the buying committee or the calls made are across sales. They're across CIO. They're across it's a very different very different value activity, but very similar volume. And I think one of the things that upmarket reps get into is they want to have that same activity metric of, hey, I made a lot of calls. And they might have one point of contact or one MPOC, main point of contact, or one decision maker that they come in, put their lunch on the table, they make their 3 calls to that decision maker, they don't pick up, they push the button to run the sequence of a bunch of emails they're not going to read. Job well done, I did what I had to do. And the best reps are the ones and the best machines are the ones that will then incentivize and drive the activity to say, yes, this is your main person, but here's the rest of the buying committee. Here are other people that could be influencers. So your activity levels have to go target those people to drive the outcome that you want to drive, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I've spent probably most of my career selling like large SMB, mid-market, and small enterprise. And so it's like 3 to 10 individuals. And I just see so much power in like threading the needle across multiple people, because you call this one person and maybe it doesn't resonate with them. And then you get more information from 3 other people and you come back and you're like, hey, this is what your colleagues or your subordinates told me. Anyway, we're running up on time. I want to be sensitive to that. I'll ask 2 questions because we've only got 4 minutes left. And I'll let you answer these 2 questions how you want. So the last question is, could you tell me any more about how you optimize this motion, AI, automation, et cetera? And if you care to share, how can people hear more from you? If there's anything you want to plug in terms of content you're putting out in the world that people might want to look up.
Sure. So we went through a project called GTMO, go-to-market orchestration, go-to-market optimization. And it was basically revitalizing outbound. And so very specifically, we had this ecosystem, and it's nice to be ZoomInfo because we have the signals, we have the companies, we have the contact information, so on and so forth. But feeding that to our SDRs and BDRs in a incredibly refined way, we had this saying, see ball, hit ball, and we probably said it 1,000 times. We're like, I want to get to a level where somebody walks in, and I got 100 SDRs that sit outside my office. Somebody walks in, they sit down at their desk, I can see their monitor, and it is like, here's what to do, here's what to say, here's why you're saying it, and we take any autonomy out. And that is the outbound go-to-market orchestration. So it starts with, here's the lead list, here's the bottom of the pyramid, here are all the leads out there. We have ranked them based on signal density, in-market scoring, so on and so forth. Here's the top 25, here's the top 30. And they're based on real signals that you can tie back to whatever those signals may be. And then with that, we then cross-reference in a graph. We say, okay, of the signals within that vertical, within that segment, these are the talk tracks that will resonate. So like you have, what do I do? Who do I reach out to? Getting back to where it was before, you have a list in that SDR. You mentioned it. SDR has to look, is this a customer? Is this not a customer? You have to deal with internal data. You have to deal with CRM data. You have to deal with Snowflake data. The amount of stuff that the SDRs were doing, it was about 5 minutes of work they had to do before a call. Now that doesn't seem high, but when you talk about the glory days at Salesforce where you're 20 seconds between calls because you have exactly who you're reaching out to and why, I never want an SDR having to look through that internal data to say, is this a customer? Is this not a customer? Is ultimate parent? Is this a subsidiary? Is some AM going to get mad at me because I'm calling into their account? Insane. Like automate all of that so that I know that I'm reaching out to these 25 accounts. These are the signals. I can drill into that signal, whether it's, again, earnings call, C-suite, funding round, take private, all the things that could be a signal. And then I click one layer further and I've got an AI talk track that says, okay, I'm talking to a mid-market tech company. This is the person I want to reach out to. I know they're not a customer. Here are the 3 people, so you get the contacts right. These are the 3 to 5 people that we know are going to be in the buying committee. Here's a cultivated script for each of them. You know, when I first started, that used to be a training. You sit down 6 months, training, scripts, talk tracks, blah, blah, blah. You had to memorize them. You took in a one-size-fits-all into everybody you talked to. Things had progressed significantly. But the amount of work that goes into that in an already working machine with a lead routing engine and XYZ123, like it was a big project to make sure that from an outbound perspective, it was world-class, that we knew exactly who we were targeting, why we were targeting, what they were saying. And it allowed us to hire a completely different skill set, if you will, from an SDR standpoint, because you didn't have to go find the best enterprise SDR because like anything else, why are you bringing in an enterprise SDR? Because they have a track record of doing that thing that you want the best people to do in that segment that is most important. Now you can bring in a much more higher potential entry level type that you can feed those years of experience into via, the C-ball, hit ball, if you will. So that was, really the journey, if you will, of GTMO for us. And we've seen, I would say, the biggest drive just from a metric standpoint, conversion rates when we implemented the AI talk tracks, moved conversion rates up 15%. Like clear as day, black and white. This was our conversion rate before. We piloted a specific SDR group and we said, all right, we're going to try these AI talk tracks, see how they work. 15% increase in conversion with everything else kept the same. So we're like, okay, we're on to something here. How do we continue to refine this? And then we started going with the prioritization of the higher signal density accounts. Conversion rate went up another 10 points. So to your last point on how can you hear more from me? I'm very easily accessible. Shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Come to ZoomInfo.com. We've got a variety of new products out there. Like a lot of what we built this go-to-market orchestration on were some of ZoomInfo's new products in terms of how can we leverage the ZoomInfo third-party data set, company contact signals with your first party. Bringing first and third together is really where the magic happens. And then how can we leverage AI to make sure that it's getting you the right company at the right time with the right message? And so that is the ultimate value proposition, I think, for any go-to-market team. And so ZoomInfo is on the forefront of that. Would love to personally tell your listeners more about it. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn, shoot me an email, james.roth@zoominfo.com. Come to our webpage, get a demo, all the things.
Awesome. We'll put all that in the show notes. And James, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If this resonated, please give us a 5-star rating and a follow. It helps us reach more people, and you get our latest and greatest content without having to search for it. And if you're looking for hands-on help in go-to-market strategy and/or RevOps, please reach out to us. We help our clients with everything from annual planning to improving processes in go-to-market, implementing systems to support those processes, and go-to-market AI. We're always happy to offer a free consultation to help you identify the best opportunities to improve your go-to-market engine with or without our help. You can find us at unionsquareconsulting.com, and the info will be in our show notes.